Hello, and welcome to my new series, Let's Learn Blades in the Dark, about the tabletop RPG by John Harper. In this series, I'm going to explain the rules of Blades in the Dark and also provide some commentary on their design. The reason why I'm doing this is first to help people learn the game, which is quite complex. The second is to help teach myself the rules. So that I can remember them despite their complexity. And the third reason is to help me think through the rules, so when I write a hack of this game, I have a good understanding of how it works. And in this first episode, I want to talk about one of the core systems of Blades in the Dark and how you roll dice in this game. So, to begin with, I want to talk about the conversation. Blades in the Dark is a conversation. That is the form of the game. And we'll see the various ways in which this is the case as we go through the rules of the game. So the flow of play in this game begins with the GM presenting a situation. Okay, that's very normal in tabletop RPGs. Then the players determine the actions of the player characters in response to the situation. Again, pretty standard stuff. However, where it differs from many other RPGs is in step 3. The GM and the players determine how the mechanics engage with the PC reaction to the situation. There are various roles taken on by the GM and the players in making these determinations of how the mechanics are engaged. And because they are both empowered in different ways to make these determinations, it does create a back and forth and a lot of negotiation between the GM and the players that sponsors or facilitates the idea that this game is a conversation and not, a story being told by the GM. Finally, the mechanical results lead to new situations, and then the GM sort of presents these situations to the players, and the players determine the action of the PCs, and we go through the cycle again. So, continuing this theme of conversation, one of the quotes I've taken from the book is that no one is in charge of the story, and another quote, you play to find out what the story will be. So these two design principles, again, get back to the idea of the game being a conversation. So no one is in charge of a conversation, right? A conversation is a give and take between the members of a dialogue. Ideally, no one's dominating the conversation. And you don't know what the result of a conversation will be if it has any kind of clear result at all, right? The conversation has its own flow and dynamics that you enjoy as it goes. And then maybe you can look back on it and say, oh, this was the story that we told. This was what happened. But you don't know that in the middle of a conversation. So these two principles, again, contribute to the idea that this game is a conversation. All right, so let's continue on to something that's very common to tabletop RPGs, rolling dice. They introduce some randomness into that conversation and make it interesting. So how do you roll dice in this game? Well, normally you roll XD6 and take the highest result. So where X is the relevant trait or stat you have. So I can't say exactly what that X will be because there's many different ways that this rolling mechanic takes place in the game. However, for those of you who have played Powered by the Apocalypse games, you'll notice that it is not roll 2d6. So this is a thing that sets Blades in the Dark apart from PBTA games, even though they share a lot of influences. So as the outcomes go, 6 is a full success. So if the highest result is a 6, you get a full success. A 4 or 5 is a partial success, and a 1, 2, or 3, those yield a bad outcome. Then, if you get 2 or more 6s, you get a crit. So, let's say I roll 4 dice, and I get a 1, a 2, and then a 6 and a 6. Well, I get a crit. Alright, so I don't just get a full success, I get beyond that an extra level of success. And that becomes relevant in various ways, according to different rules in the game. So we'll get into that as we go through those different rules. However, if you have 0 points in the relevant stat, so if xd6 is 0d6, what do? You roll 2d6 and take the lowest result. So clearly, taking the lowest result, you're going to have worse chances than if you were taking the highest result. 2d6, take the highest, is normally what you start with as your kind of highest stat if you're making an action roll. 2d6, take the lowest, obviously quite a bit worse. But it's wrong to think in this game of your characters as having, 1 or 2 good stats and then everything else being dump stats. It's more like they're competent at basically everything they can do in the game, and they excel at the things that your playbook specializes in. So that's a little bit different than, say, a D&D character, or even some PBTA characters. But another point to consider is if you have the 0 points, and you're rolling 2d6 and take the lowest, you cannot get a crit. So even if you roll 2d6, take the lowest, you get 2 6s, that does not give you a crit in this situation. So, what kind of rolls can you make with these dice? Well, the first one is the action roll. And action rolls are what you use when your characters are trying to overcome some kind of significant obstacle, so some kind of danger or trouble that they're in. You're going to use this one a lot, obviously. The next is downtime rolls. So downtime rolls are used when your characters are not out on a score or a mission, but are instead trying to get things done in between missions. So you can see how effective they are at doing that by using these downtime rolls. The next are the fortune rolls, and these are kind of like, flipping a coin to see what comes up. It's basically appealing to fortune to see which way the wind blows, what kind of outcome happens. For those of you who have played the Burning Wheel, this is kind of similar to the Die of Fate in that game. And next we have resistance rolls. So there are 2 situations in which you can use a resistance roll. The primary situation is if you get a bad result on a roll and you want to resist it, you make a resistance roll. And this will allow you to, or allow the players, I should say, to be more specific, to resist or reject, if you wanted to put it strongly, the bad result that their roll gave. Of course, they have to exchange that for some stress. The other situation in which you use a resistance roll is if the player characters are up against a particularly fearsome or powerful opposition. So if a player character is fighting a famous and skilled duelist, then they may have to make a resistance roll before they can even make their attack against them. So there's 2 ways to use the resistance roll, but we'll get to that later. As for the next episode, we are going to be talking about action rolls, and we're going to get very deep into action rolls and how they work. They're quite complex, but they're also quite interesting, and they're important to the game, so I'm sure you will want to check that out. I will see you next time for that.